All right, so we are in Daniel, and this indicates we're in Daniel chapter 2, and we are. I'm excited to be back in the book and just kind of to go over some of the stuff we've had before. The book of Daniel can be divided into three parts. And now, actually, I really can't ask the questions that I normally ask. So I would normally ask, why is it divided into three parts? And maybe you can think of the answers, because I certainly can't hear you because it's muted. But the reason is because of the languages that it's written in. The first portion is written in Hebrew, the second portion is in Aramaic, and the third portion is back into Hebrew. We think indicating the audiences that it was intended for and who was involved. So we've already gone through section 1, the judgment of the Jews, which essentially was chapter 1 with a couple verses in chapter 2. And now we are in the second one, the prophetic warning to the Gentiles, which was written in Aramaic. And then when we're done with the prophetic section in a number of weeks from now, we will go back to the prophetic warning to the Jews. And if we were to go and outline Daniel in more detail, it would look something like this, which I'm not sure if you can read it or if your screens are large enough, but we have completed the first one, the judgment of the Jews. We are now beginning the last couple of weeks, the prophetic warning to the Gentiles, which is in red. And we are dealing with the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. So last week there was Dan, and this week it's me, and next week it's Greg. If anyone wants the detailed outline of what we're teaching and how to outline the book of Daniel, just send me an email. I'll send it to you. It'll be even more detailed than what you see on the screen right now. But I'll be happy to do that if anybody's interested in getting that. So let's recap for a minute the stuff that Dan covered so excellently last week. Get our brains kind of going in the right direction. The king has had a dream, right? And he orders his advisors to do what? Not only to interpret the dream, but first to tell him what the dream was. And he's, I think, testing them. It's a little bit like a storefront psychic. Have you ever seen a storefront, like a window or something that's with a psychic, and they have a sign that says by appointment only? I always think, why do they need an appointment? They should know, right? They should know I'm coming. I'm not coming, but somebody's coming. Or maybe, have you ever seen the headline that says psychic wins lotto again? I have never seen that. Well, I think that's kind of what's going on here with the king, that he doesn't buy it. And they've been giving him what wisdom they've had, and he wants them to prove themselves, and I think he's testing it. So basically saying, I don't buy it. You have to tell me the dream before you tell me the interpretation. Now, some time has elapsed in the section there, the judgment of the Jews. Daniel and friends were the first hostages, and they were in a program to re-educate them, retrain them, maybe brainwash them into being Babylonians, Chaldeans, and be in service for the king. Now, some time has elapsed. It doesn't say exactly how much time, but Daniel and company are now grouped as wise men. How do we know this? And if I were to be able to speak with you, maybe you would know. But I can't tell you what you're saying, so I'm going to say why. In chapter 2, verse 10, they go to kill the wise men, and they go to kill Daniel and company. And so we see that they are now considered part of the Chaldeans, part of the wise men. So in a recap, starting in verse 10, we read, and this is all truncated, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, and no one can show it to the king except the gods. Because of this, the king was furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. The wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. So the guard we see is coming to kill the wise men, and part of that, a subset of that, is Daniel and his companions. Now, when you teach the Bible, especially a book like Daniel, there is a challenge of applying it. Now, we have this book written in the 6th century BC. It's a little tricky to try to take something from the 6th century BC and apply it to our lives in this century, but we're going to try to do that and find some principles maybe that we can apply. Liberals claim the book was not written in 6th century BC. They claim it was written sometime in the 2nd century, and I want to address this error for a moment. They date the authorship of Daniel as late 2nd century rather than early 6th century BC, in my opinion, because they have a problem with God supernaturally giving an accurate and detailed prophecy, the prophecies that are seen in the book, especially Greek and Roman empires that hadn't occurred yet, and they really do occur. And so I think they have a problem with that, and I think they also have some problems with some linguistics. But the weight of evidence supports the traditional view that it was written by Daniel, and he was a hostage, and he had been there from Jerusalem, and it was the 6th century. And the man Daniel wrote this. That all fits the facts better than any of the liberal dating. And again, if you want, I can send you information about the arguments with regards to the dates and authorship. Nobody has questioned the 6th century date of Daniel for thousands of years until relatively recent liberal theologians began questioning everything supernatural in Scripture. And that with the downward spiral of that, they finally began questioning everything in Scripture. And I think the problem that they have is not actually with the view of Daniel. I think much of it is their view of God. Can God not do this? So again, if you want to read up on the date and authorship of Daniel, I have a PDF. I'll send it to you. Just send me an email. What we have is the book of Daniel, written by Daniel. It's written in the 6th century BC, and he's inspired by a sovereign God, an omnipotent God. The trick we have as teaching is how to apply an historical account from thousands of years ago to our lives today. But we have some, in our narrative, certain realities, certain principles, I think, that we can find that transcend time, even from the 6th century BC to the 21st century AD. So we're going to look for those. We have in our recap, we've encountered a king who's given an unreasonable demand, which cannot be fulfilled, and then orders everyone on the team to be executed. Now let's translate that into 21st century terms, where we have an executive who creates a hostile work environment and makes unreasonable demands which cannot be fulfilled, along with the threat that anyone who objects can be demoted or fired. I think that's pretty realistic for our era. I know in my career, I worked with a number of bosses who, well, I don't want to call them jerks, right? But they exhibited a lot of jerk-like behavior, right? So I was wondering, well, how common is this experience? Or maybe it was me, right? So I did a search on self-help book titles dealing with this, and here's what I found. This is just a few of them. How to Work for an Idiot. I Hate My Boss, and the subtitle being How to Survive and Get Ahead When Your Boss is a Tyrant, Control Freak, or Just Plain Nuts. Now, in the literature game, you are told by editors that your title really has to condense everything in the book and get the reader to understand what the book's about and entice them to buy the book. Because people do judge books by their cover and by their titles. Well, this is a descriptive title. Or you have Mutiny on the Bounty, which is a novel, and it's about the British naval ship, the Bounty, and the captain, the executive of that ship, was extremely difficult, and the first mate, Mr. Christian took the brunt from the captain until they finally mutinied. Or we have the next one, my boss is a jerk, or dealing with a bad boss, that's another title, or when your boss is a jerk. That word jerk comes out a lot. So the titles are out there. They're not hard to find. So I think, unfortunately, we have situations where we have executives and managers and people who are maybe king-like and jerk-like in their behavior, and that exists everywhere in work. I think it's neighborhoods and HOAs and the church and all kinds of places. There are people who are difficult. When Cindy and I were first married, I was recruited into a ministry. They actually came to my place of business and pitched the job to me. And I loved the work. I loved it. It was tremendous. But I reported directly to the founder and CEO, who was a tyrant. He was a self-made millionaire many times over. He funded the whole thing himself, and he was impossible to deal with. If I told you the kinds of things this man did, who was a believer, you wouldn't believe me. I think you would be appalled, and you would think I was exaggerating, but I wouldn't be. And I lasted 9 months, and I quit. And I loved the work. He lasted just a little while longer. After I quit, he came down with cancer and died. And shortly after that, the president of the ministry was killed in a plane crash. And that ministry is no more. So we find there can be negative stuff like this. What's the biblical model? What is the biblical model of authority, either in the church or outside of the church, when we have Christians dealing with other Christians? What do we see? Is there a model? Certainly not the model of Nebuchadnezzar, right? That wouldn't be, you say, well, the Bible says, well, no, Nebuchadnezzar is not the model of how to act. But we do have something from the King of Kings. In Matthew 20, Jesus called them, his disciples, to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. This then would be the principle for leadership inside the church. And I think if you work outside the church, you're in most of you, all of you, they do work in secular authority. When maybe you don't work now, you're retired. But I think this is the model of authority even in a secular company, as much as you can, so that you are operating from a Christian perspective. And it is not easy. Daniel was not in such an environment. And I would guess most of us at some point in time had to deal with jerk-like behavior directed both at us and, unfortunately, probably sometimes from us, right? And I know I can have jerk-like behavior too. So I think that's true, and we need to understand this. So what's the principle here? What's the takeaway that we can get? Well, the first one is you will encounter jerks, right? This is from my favorite verse, 1 Richard 1:1. I didn't say it was a Bible verse, it's just my verse. Most people are jerks. Or if you will, from the Bible, Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We exhibit our sinful behavior, and that's true. We do. So the first principle I think we have to realize is we are dealing with broken people. Let's see how Daniel dealt with it, especially in his very intense circumstance. So the guard has come, right, to kill him. And it says that Daniel replied with prudence and discretion. Prudence and discretion. Now, if Daniel were Amish, it might be this, right? It might be the names of two girls, Prudence and Discretion, and her sister, right? But alas, he's not Amish and he's not talking about these two girls, right? He's talking to the guy who's come to kill him, and he's talking carefully and wisely. So this is our second takeaway. We should exercise prudence and discretion. Now look at this image for a moment. All right, we have our two sisters, Prudence and Discretion. And what are they doing? They are rollerblading. They are exercising. So we will remember our second principle to exercise prudence and discretion because we have the image of prudence and discretion exercising. Get it? Right? Do you know how hard it was for me to find an image of two Amish girls exercising? I mean, this is good stuff. Come on now. So we will remember the principle, exercise prudence and discretion, which is important. Interestingly, when Daniel is doing this, being careful and prudent and discreet, he doesn't try to stop the killing, all at once at least. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. And he didn't say, "Don't kill us." Instead, he said, "What's the hurry?" He asks a question. Why is the decree of the king so urgent? So he's not arguing with the captain. He doesn't try to get the captain to stop from doing his deadly duty. He just asks a question, what is so urgent? And I think at this point, Daniel doesn't know what's going on. I don't think there's nothing here that indicates he knows about the dream. He knows anything going on. He just knows that this guy has come to kill them. And he's like, whoa, slow down. What's the deal? Right? Or in the words of Jesus Christ Superstar, what's the buzz? Tell me what's happening. Right? That's what he kind of does here. And Arioch, it says, makes the matter known to Daniel. Daniel's prudence and discretion allow the captain to pause and explain what has happened without violating the king's direct command. What does this show us? I think there's another takeaway here. I think Daniel has developed a good relationship with the captain of the guard in advance of the problem. And it gives Daniel the opportunity to think and to act and to pray. And these would be the next two principles that we have as a takeaway. We want to work at developing good relationships before there's a problem. And think, act, and pray. So we say in verse 16, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Now, we still don't have anything that Daniel knows anything. He does not know the dream at this point or its interpretation, but he's asking for appointment nonetheless. This will at least pause the executions, and it's demonstrating, I think, faith as well. Then Daniel went into the house and made known the matter to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven. So there's a pause in the killing. He thinks and acts and prays. Now, I would like the order to be different. I think it should be pray first and then think and then act, but that is not what goes on here, and I want to be true to the text. That is not the order of events. He has a good relationship. He uses that. He says what's up, and then he's thinking. I think it's implied that he's thinking, but he's thinking, what am I going to do? And then he acts. I know, I'll get an appointment with the king. And after that, he goes to his friends and asks for prayer. Well, I think we have these two things going on with relationships and think, act, and pray. And I don't think the order there is necessarily that that's the order you have to do in any given circumstance or I have to do, but it's what Daniel has done. So what happens next? Pretty exciting. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. So Daniel goes to sleep And I don't think when he went to sleep, he had any idea yet, and he was still able to go to sleep. But then during the night, God reveals to him a night vision. And Daniel then blessed God, the God of heaven. Boom. He goes to sleep not having the answer. While he's sleeping, he gets the answer. And that is a good thing because he's got it in the morning, an appointment to explain things to the king. You get that? This brings us actually to our passage for today. I've kind of recapped in very brief terms what Dan covered last week. But we come to Daniel 2:20-30 to see how Daniel is responding now to what God has done in this difficult circumstance. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings." Remember that phrase? We had that in the intro of the book over and over again with the 100 or so years before that we covered with the Assyrians and the Persians and the Medes and Nebuchadnezzar's father and all of that, Egypt. The kings were being raised up and set down. Daniel remembers this. And he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. Not only wisdom, but wisdom to the wise man, Daniel, at this point. And Daniel continues, he reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness, and the light dwells in him. He is reciting a praise to God about God. Does God not know these things? Daniel's rehearsing the attributes of God, the person of God. And it is God who knows the hidden things, and light dwells within him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise. Daniel praises God for answering his prayer. For you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. You've answered my prayer. For you have made known to us the king's matter. You see, God grows in Daniel's experience. God doesn't grow, but Daniel's experience sees God larger, sees more of God as Daniel matures in his vision, his view of God. He sees the result of his faith and prayer. And I would submit that the difficulty that he was in was the fuel for his growth in his experience and experiencing God bigger and better, if you will. God not changing, but Daniel changing. What's the takeaway we have here? Well, God grows in our experience, and our view of him grows, which result in praise as we are in circumstances that are difficult and we respond correctly. Maybe even when we don't respond correctly. I think there's a little of this, like what we see in C.S. Lewis's book, Prince Caspian. You are familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia, I hope? Well, in the book, Prince Caspian, there is a child named Lucy, and she first encounters the Christ figure Aslan when she gets into Narnia. And now she has left, and she's come back again in this book to Narnia, and she sees Aslan, the great lion, for the first time, coming back in. And she's not seen him for a long, long time, and they have a wonderful reunion. And then Aslan begins their conversation, and he says, "Welcome, child." "Aslan," she says, "you're bigger." "That is because you are older, little one." "Not because you are." "I am not. But every year that you grow, you will find me bigger." I think there is something like that going on with Daniel. God is working him, working with him, working on him. Really, if we peek ahead just a little bit to chapter 3, I think, he's getting him ready for the lion's den. Right? He's getting him ready for the other stuff that's coming along, the handwriting on the wall and all the rest. Right? But what happens this morning? Well, therefore, it says in 24, Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. And look at this. He does not ask only for his own life and the lives of his friends. He also asks for the lives of all the other wise men. And we know in the future lessons that they try to kill him. They are, in a sense, in our business terms maybe, his competition. And he treats them well. He treats his competition as he would like them to treat him, I think. He doesn't, he could have had them all wiped out, I think, but he doesn't. In verse 25, then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and thus said to the king, and I love this, this is very, very real life people. I found among the exiles of Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. He takes credit. Did he do anything? Did he find him? No. It's on Daniel. But and people do that. This is very real life. But on the other hand, I think if Daniel had failed, it might have been Arioch's head too, because he's bringing in somebody to the king and then he failed, so the king might not have liked that. So I guess he's taking some risk here, but I think it's interesting that he's taking credit. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was, you remember this, Belteshazzar, which means prince on whom Bel favors, prince whom Bel favors, the deity, the Babylonian deity Bel, which may have become Baal. Are you able to make known to me, says the king, the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? He's still on, I want you to prove yourself and tell me the dream. And Daniel answers the king and says, no wise man, enchanters, magician, astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. Wait a minute. I already know this from the other ones. I'm going to kill you, right? Daniel speaks truth to power here. King, what you're asking is unreasonable. That's gutsy. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Not Bel. It's not the Babylonian deity. It's my God. It's Yahweh. It's my God in heaven who reveals mystery, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Well, King, God is speaking to you, and he's let you know about the future. And I think Daniel purposely and wisely dangles the answer a little bit for the king. And the king gets his attention, and then he continues. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. And Daniel sets up the stage, sets up the king for his delivery. And I think he's developing his credibility here a little bit. Basically saying, if I can do the first part, I tell you what the dream is, then when I tell you the second part, you'll listen. And he gets right to the point, and just kind of a rabbit trail a little bit. I think this is important for us to remember, at least maybe for some of us, that we need to remember if we have something important to say, start at the end. Especially if you're dealing with kings or executive driver types who are impatient, as this king was. Just get to the bottom line, because that's what they want. We have the tendency to fill in all the little details, but Daniel doesn't say, oh, I was so worried, and we prayed, and then we went, and we had dinner, and oh, I had a really nice kanash, and then I went to bed, and oh, the dream I had. He doesn't do that like that, right? So he gets to the point with the king. To you, verse 29, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this. It's the future we're talking about, king. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. God who reveals mysteries has told you, O king, what is to be in the future. And then he says in 30, as we are wrapping up, but as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living. So why has it been revealed to me? In order that the interpretation may be made known to the king. God wants you to know, king. He not only wanted you to know the dream, he wants you to know the interpretation of the dream, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. I'm not special, says Daniel. I'm not taking credit. But God has revealed to me the meaning, and I think there's maybe a little implication of, so don't kill me or you'll never know. God has revealed to me in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know, that you may understand the thoughts that are in your mind that you got while you were sleeping. So he sets it up. And what happened after that? Well, you'll just have to come back next week because our time's up, and that's the end of my passage.